The lecture hall buzzed with the usual pre-class chatter as students filtered in for advanced xenobiology. Professor Varric, a towering Altarian with crystalline skin that reflected the overhead lights, organized his notes at the podium. The course attracted students from across the galaxy, all eager to study at the prestigious Galactic Sciences Institute on Kepler Station. Among the sea of diverse alien faces sat Maya Chen, hunched over her tablet in the back corner. Her dark hair fell like a curtain around her face as she typed furiously, seemingly oblivious to the world around her. The other students had long since stopped trying to include her in their study groups or social gatherings. Maya was polite when directly addressed but never initiated conversation, never raised her hand, and spoke only when called upon directly. "Weird little human," whispered Zextar, a reptilian saurid whose scales shimmered green with amusement. His study partner, a gelatinous blob named Glurp, quivered in what passed for laughter among their species. "I heard she got in on some kind of charity program," added Lyra, a graceful ethereal whose gossamer wings fluttered with superiority. "Humans are still so primitive. They only joined the galactic community 50 years ago." Maya's fingers never paused in their typing, but her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She had heard these whispers for months now, ever since arriving at the station. Earth was indeed the newest member of the galactic community, and humans were still viewed as the awkward newcomers trying to prove they belonged among the stars. Professor Varric called for attention, his voice resonating with harmonic frequencies that demanded respect. "Today we will discuss the recent discovery of the void entities in the Outer Rim territories. As you know, these creatures have been systematically destroying entire star systems, consuming all organic matter in their path." The holographic display activated, showing devastating footage of once thriving worlds reduced to barren rock. Gasps echoed through the hall as students witnessed the sheer scale of destruction. Entire civilizations wiped out in mere hours, their biosignatures vanishing from sensors as if they had never existed. The Galactic Defense Force has been unable to establish any meaningful communication with these entities, Varric continued. "Their technology appears to be purely biological, yet it surpasses our most advanced synthetic systems. Traditional weapons have proven ineffective." A blue-skinned Aquarian raised a webbed hand. "Professor, has anyone attempted to study their behavioral patterns? Perhaps there's a way to predict their movements?" "An excellent question, Tidal Wave. Several research teams have tried, but the entities seem to operate on a logic entirely foreign to known sentient species. They appear randomly, strike without warning, and disappear just as quickly." Maya's typing had stopped. She stared at the holographic images with an intensity that made her dark eyes appear almost black. Her mind raced through possibilities, analyzing patterns that others might miss. She had spent countless hours studying the available data on these creatures, but something about the attack patterns nagged at her. The lecture continued with discussions of various failed defense strategies. The proud Altarians had lost 3 colony worlds despite their advanced shield technology. The militaristic Draknari, known throughout the galaxy for their warrior culture, had watched helplessly as their strongest battle fleets were torn apart by creatures that seemed to absorb energy weapons and convert the power for their own use. "The situation grows more desperate each day." Varric's voice carried genuine concern. "The entities are moving closer to core worlds. Conservative estimates suggest they will reach the inner systems within 6 months if their current pace continues." As the class period neared its end, Varric assigned teams for a research project analyzing potential countermeasures. Names were called, partnerships formed, but Maya remained seated as students filed out around her. She had learned early in the semester that she would likely be assigned whatever group was short a member, if any group would have her at all. "Miss Chen," Professor Varric's voice stopped her as she gathered her belongings. "A moment, if you please." Maya approached the podium, her steps careful and measured. Up close, Varric's crystalline features seemed to pulse with an inner light, a sign of deep thought among his species. "I have reviewed your academic records," he began, his tone neutral. "Your test scores are exceptional, yet you contribute little to class discussions. In Altarian culture, knowledge shared is knowledge multiplied. Perhaps you could benefit from more active participation." "I prefer to observe and analyze before speaking, Professor," Maya replied quietly. "I find that most students share opinions rather than insights." Varric's crystal skin flickered, a sign of surprise. "An interesting perspective. I trust you will apply this analytical approach to the group project. You have been assigned to Team 7 with Cadet Torgun and Initiate Whispersong. Maya nodded and turned to leave, but Varric's next words stopped her. The human perspective may prove valuable in this endeavor. Miss Chen, your species has a unique history of adapting to seemingly impossible odds. Do not underestimate the value of your contributions. Alone in the lecture hall, Maya allowed herself a small smile. If only he knew how right he was about human adaptability. As she made her way through the station's corridors, past groups of chattering students from dozens of different worlds, she reflected on the professor's words. The other species saw humans as primitive newcomers barely worthy of attention. They had no idea that humanity's journey to the stars had been forged through centuries of conflict, innovation born from desperation, and survival tactics honed by being the underdog in every fight that mattered. Maya reached her small dormitory and activated her personal computer system. Multiple screens flickered to life, displaying data streams, tactical analyses, and simulation programs that would have impressed even the most advanced military strategists. This was where she truly came alive, away from the judging eyes and whispered comments of her classmates. The footage of the Void Entity attacks played on repeat as she worked, her fingers dancing across holographic interfaces with practiced precision. There was something in the attack patterns, something everyone else was missing. The entities weren't random at all. They were following a complex algorithm, testing different defensive capabilities and learning from each encounter. More troubling still, Maya had detected subtle variations in their assault techniques that suggested rapid evolution. These creatures weren't just destroying civilizations. They were studying them, adapting, becoming more efficient with each world they consumed. As the station's artificial night cycle began, Maya continued her work in the quiet darkness of her room. Tomorrow she would meet with her assigned teammates and pretend to be just another struggling student, trying to contribute to an academic exercise. But tonight, she would prepare for war. The Team 7 meeting space was cramped and poorly ventilated, typical of the areas assigned to student groups. Maya arrived precisely on time to find her teammates already deep in discussion. Cadet Torgun was a massive Draknari warrior, whose scarred hide spoke of countless battles. While Initiate Whispersong belonged to the enigmatic psionic collective, her ethereal form seeming to shimmer between dimensions. "Ah, the silent human joins us," Torgun's voice rumbled like distant thunder. His species valued directness above all else, viewing subtlety as weakness. "I have outlined 17 different assault strategies we could recommend to the defense force. Traditional tactics, proven in battle." Whispersong's response came as thoughts that brushed against their minds rather than spoken words. "Violence begets violence, warrior. Perhaps we should explore diplomatic solutions, seek to understand these entities rather than destroy them." Maya settled into her chair and activated her tablet, pulling up the research she had compiled through the night. Both teammates glanced at her expectantly, waiting for her contribution to their debate. "I've been analyzing the attack patterns," Maya said quietly. "The entities aren't acting randomly. There's a definite sequence to their targeting, and their methods evolve after each encounter." Torgun snorted, his massive frame shifting with skepticism. "Random or not, they die like everything else when you hit them hard enough. The problem is our weapons aren't strong enough. We need bigger guns, stronger shields." "But they absorb the energy from the Draknari fleet weapons," Maya continued, pulling up holographic displays of the battle footage. "Look at this sequence from the Kethmore system attack. The first wave of entities took significant damage from plasma cannons. The second wave showed complete immunity to the same weapons." Whispersong leaned forward, her interest piqued. "You suggest they learn from combat exposure?" "More than that. They're collecting data on every defensive system, every weapon type, every tactical formation used against them. Each attack is a field test, and they're building countermeasures in real time." Maya manipulated the holographic display, highlighting subtle changes in entity behavior across multiple encounters. Here, in the Altarian defense of Christos Prime, the entities initially struggled with phase shield technology. By the third wave, they had developed energy signatures that bypassed the shields entirely. The evidence was compelling, but Torgun remained unconvinced. "So they adapt. Warriors who fail to adapt die. This changes nothing about the solution. We must strike harder and faster." "Actually, it changes everything," Maya said, her voice gaining confidence. If they're studying us, learning from every encounter, then traditional military responses are feeding them exactly what they need to become unstoppable. She pulled up a three-dimensional model of entity attack patterns across 12 star systems. Look at the progression. They started with agricultural worlds, places with minimal defenses. Then they moved to industrial colonies with moderate military presence. Now they're hitting fortress worlds with massive defense fleets. A logical progression for any invasion force, Torgun argued. Start small, build strength, tackle harder targets. No, you're missing the point. They're not building strength. They're gathering intelligence. Each world they attack teaches them something new about galactic defensive capabilities. They're assembling a complete database of our military technology. Whispersong's mental voice carried growing alarm. If your assessment is correct, human, then every battle we fight makes them stronger. Every weapon we deploy becomes obsolete the moment they encounter it. Maya nodded grimly. Which means the current strategy of throwing larger fleets and more advanced weapons at them is exactly what they want us to do. We're essentially training them to defeat us. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Torgun's warrior instincts rebelled against the concept of an enemy that grew stronger through combat, while Whispersong contemplated the terrifying efficiency of such a system. Then what do you propose? Torgun finally asked, his tone grudging but curious. Maya hesitated. The ideas forming in her mind were dangerous, unconventional, and would likely be dismissed as the naive fantasies of a primitive human. But the data didn't lie, and the current approach was leading the galaxy toward extinction. We stop fighting them the way they expect us to fight, she said slowly. Every species in the galaxy approaches warfare the same way. Organized fleets, coordinated strategies, predictable patterns. We're all products of similar technological development paths. And, Whispersong prompted, humans are different. Our history is full of asymmetric warfare, guerrilla tactics, strategies born from desperation rather than superiority. We've always been the underdog, so we learn to fight dirty. Torgun's eyes narrowed. You speak of cowardly tactics, human. Honorable warriors face their enemies directly. Honorable warriors are all dead, Maya replied bluntly. The entities have already proved that conventional military responses don't work. If we keep doing what we've always done, we'll keep getting what we've always gotten. Defeat. She activated another display, this one showing historical human conflicts. My species fought wars for thousands of years before we reached the stars. We learned to be unpredictable, to use our weaknesses as strengths. To win battles we had no business winning. The images showed primitive humans using terrain, weather, and enemy expectations against technologically superior foes. Guerrilla fighters disappearing into jungles. Resistance movements using the enemy's own infrastructure against them. Desperate last stands that somehow turned into victories through sheer audacity. The entities are learning to counter organized military responses, Maya continued. But they're studying civilized warfare, predictable patterns. They don't know how to counter tactics that deliberately break the rules of engagement. Whispersong's mental voice carried intrigued uncertainty. You propose we abandon millennia of military doctrine? I propose we remember what we were before we became civilized. Humans survived ice ages, plagues, and global wars not because we were stronger or smarter than our environment, but because we were more adaptable and more willing to do whatever it took to survive. Maya pulled up a new set of data, this time showing detailed specifications of human military equipment and training protocols. Every other species developed weapons and tactics based on their natural abilities. Draknari use brute force because they're naturally strong. Altarians rely on energy shields because their crystalline structure naturally deflects radiation. Everyone builds on their strengths. And humans? Torgun asked, despite himself. Humans don't have natural strengths. We're not particularly fast, strong, or resilient. We can't naturally process multiple energy spectrums or interface with technology through biological connections. So we learn to use everything else: environment, psychology, deception, tools, and most importantly, unpredictability. The implications hung heavy in the air. Maya was suggesting that the galaxy's best hope against an adaptive enemy might lie not in advanced technology or superior firepower, but in the primitive cunning of the newest species to join the galactic community. This is madness, Torgun muttered, but his tone suggested he was beginning to see the logic. Maybe, Maya admitted, but it's the only approach they haven't encountered yet, and it might be the only thing that can surprise them enough to give us an advantage. As the meeting ended, Maya gathered her materials with characteristic quietness. Her teammates exchanged uncertain glances, unsure whether they had just witnessed brilliance or delusion from the strange human who barely spoke in class. Neither of them noticed Maya's small smile as she left the room, or the encrypted message she sent from her tablet as she walked back to her dormitory. Some preparations couldn't wait for official approval. 3 days after the team meeting, emergency klaxons shrieked throughout Kepler Station. Maya bolted upright in her narrow dormitory bed as red warning lights bathed the room in crimson shadows. The station's automated voice echoed through the corridors in multiple languages, but the message was the same in each one. All personnel report to designated safe zones immediately. This is not a drill. Students poured into the hallways, their panic palpable as rumors spread faster than official information. Maya moved against the crowd, her destination clear while others wandered in confusion. She had spent weeks memorizing the station's layout, identifying critical systems and potential vulnerabilities. Now that knowledge would be put to the test. The observation deck was nearly empty when she arrived, most students having fled to interior compartments as instructed. Through the massive transparent aluminum windows, space stretched endlessly in all directions, dotted with the reassuring lights of patrolling defense vessels. But Maya wasn't looking at the familiar sights. She was watching the sensors. The first indication of their arrival was subtle, a barely perceptible distortion in the starfield, like heat shimmer on a summer day. Then the distortions began to grow, reality bending around something that shouldn't exist in normal space. The void entities were emerging from whatever dimension they called home. By the 7 moons, whispered a voice behind her. Professor Varric had arrived, his crystalline skin flickering with patterns Maya had never seen before, what she now recognized as fear among his species. The entities materialized fully, and Maya felt her breath catch despite all her preparation. They were massive beyond comprehension, each one easily the size of a small moon. Their forms defied description, constantly shifting between geometric patterns and organic curves, as if they existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously and only showed fragments of themselves in normal space. How many? Maya asked quietly. Sensors indicate 12 primary entities, Varric replied, his voice strained. More may be in dimensional flux, undetectable until they fully manifest. Around the entities, space itself seemed to writhe and twist. The carefully positioned defense satellites that protected Kepler Station began to malfunction, their sophisticated targeting systems unable to lock onto something that technically wasn't entirely there. The defense fleet is moving to intercept, Varric continued, pointing to the formation of ships accelerating toward the threat. Admiral Krextal is commanding personally. If anyone can stop them, it's him. Maya watched the approaching fleet with growing dread. She recognized the formations, the tactics, even the specific ships from her research. Everything was proceeding exactly as it had in the 12 previous encounters. The entities weren't just ready for this response, they were counting on it. The first exchange of fire lit up space like a miniature nova. The fleet's primary weapons, particle beams, plasma cannons, and quantum torpedoes, struck the lead entity with enough force to shatter a planet. For a moment, Maya allowed herself to hope as the creature's form wavered and contracted. Then it began to glow. They're absorbing the energy, she breathed. The entity's surface rippled and flowed, incorporating the weapon's energy into its own structure. When the glow faded, the creature had grown noticeably larger, its form more stable and defined. Worse, the other entities were changing too, their surfaces developing patterns that matched the signatures of the weapons that had just been used against their companion. Impossible, Varric whispered. The quantum torpedoes use randomized energy matrices. There should be no way to predict or counter them. They're not countering them, Maya said, her voice tight with realization. They're learning to duplicate them. As if to prove her point, one of the entities suddenly pulsed and bolts of energy identical to the fleet's own weapons lanced out toward the defending ships. The vessel's shields, designed to deflect external threats, offered no protection against their own technology turned against them. The first ship to die was the heavy cruiser Domination, pride of the Draknari fleet. Its massive armor plating, capable of withstanding direct impact from asteroids, simply melted away under its own converted weapons. The crew had seconds to scream before their ship became an expanding cloud of superheated plasma. We have to evacuate the station, Varric said, turning from the window. If the fleet falls, nothing can protect us. Running won't help, Maya replied, her eyes still fixed on the battle. They'll just follow and destroy the evacuation ships one by one. They've done it before. More ships were dying now, their own weapons systematically turned against them. The entities moved with impossible grace for things their size, flowing through space like living geometry, always perfectly positioned to convert incoming fire into devastating counterattacks. Then what do you suggest? Varric's composure was cracking, his crystalline features pulsing erratically. Maya was quiet for a long moment, watching as Admiral Krextal's flagship attempted a desperate ramming attack. The massive dreadnought, carrying 10,000 crew members, accelerated directly toward the largest entity. For a heartbeat, it seemed like the primitive tactic might work through sheer audacity. Then the entity simply phased partially out of normal space, allowing the ship to pass harmlessly through its dimensional shadow before phasing back in. The dreadnought emerged from the passage with its hull integrity compromised, systems failing across all decks. It drifted helplessly as entities surrounded it like predators closing in on wounded prey. I need access to the station's communication array, Maya said finally. Full spectrum, maximum power output. That's restricted to senior staff only, Varric protested. And what could you possibly? Professor, in the next 10 minutes, 12 entities are going to finish destroying our defense fleet. After that, they'll reduce this station and everyone on it to component atoms. I'm asking you to trust me. Something in her tone made Varric look at her more carefully. The frightened student who barely spoke in class was gone, replaced by someone who radiated quiet confidence despite the chaos around them. What are you going to do? Something they won't expect, Maya said, already moving toward the door. Something that breaks every rule of civilized warfare. Varric hesitated only a moment before following. The communication center is on level 7. I'll authorize your access, but Maya... He caught her arm as they reached the corridor. If you have some kind of plan, shouldn't you coordinate with the defense force? With the civilian authorities? Maya smiled, and Varric was surprised to find it genuinely reassuring despite the circumstances. Professor, what I'm about to do would be considered illegal, immoral, and tactically insane by every military doctrine in the galaxy. The last thing I need is official authorization. As they hurried through the station's corridors, passing groups of panicked civilians and overwhelmed security personnel, Maya's mind raced through the final details of a plan she had hoped never to use. It was desperate, dangerous, and would likely result in her court-martial if she survived. But it was also completely unpredictable, which meant the entities would have no prepared counter for it. In the war between civilization and chaos, sometimes the only winning move was to embrace the chaos and turn it into a weapon. Behind them, through the station's viewports, the last of the defense fleet was dying in brilliant flashes of light. The entities had learned everything they needed to know about galactic military doctrine. Now it was time to teach them about human warfare. The communication center doors slid open with a soft hiss, revealing banks of sophisticated equipment capable of reaching across the galaxy in real time. Maya's fingers moved across the controls with practiced efficiency, her hands steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to attempt. This message is going out on all frequencies, she said quietly. Emergency channels, commercial networks, even entertainment broadcasts. Everyone in the galaxy is going to hear this. Hear what? Varric asked, but Maya was already activating the transmission array. The truth about what it means to be human. Maya's hands flew across the communication array with practiced precision, establishing connections to every active transmission node within 100 light-years. Emergency frequencies, military channels, civilian networks, even the entertainment broadcast that kept billions of beings connected across the galaxy, all of them would carry her message simultaneously. Broadcasting in 3, 2, 1. She activated the transmission, and her image appeared on screens throughout known space. She didn't look like a savior of civilization. Her clothes were rumpled from sleeping in them, her hair was pulled back in a hasty ponytail, and exhaustion shadowed her eyes. But when she spoke, her voice carried an authority that had nothing to do with rank or position. My name is Maya Chen, and I'm a human student at Kepler Station. In approximately 6 minutes, the void entities will finish destroying our defense fleet and begin their assault on this facility. When that happens, they will have completed their survey of conventional galactic military capabilities. Behind her, through the communication center's windows, The final moments of the battle played out in devastating silence. The entities moved through the scattered remains of Admiral Krextal's fleet like sharks through a school of fish, methodically cataloging the debris for useful information. For months, we have watched these creatures destroy world after world, and we have responded the same way every time. Organized fleets using standardized tactics and conventional weapons. The results have been consistent: total defeat and the loss of billions of lives. Maya's image appeared simultaneously in the war rooms of a dozen species, on the personal devices of civilians huddled in shelters, and on the emergency channels of every ship in space. Across the galaxy, beings who had never heard of humans before today found themselves listening to one with rapt attention. The entities aren't just random destroyers. They're systematic, methodical, and incredibly adaptive. Every battle we fight teaches them something new about our military capabilities. Every weapon we deploy becomes obsolete the moment they encounter it. We are literally training them to defeat us. On the bridge of the Altarian command ship Crystal Harmony, Admiral Zarthek watched the transmission with growing disbelief. Who authorized this broadcast? And why are we listening to a student? His aide, a young officer whose crystalline structure flickered with nervous energy, glanced at the tactical displays. Sir, everything she's saying matches our intelligence assessments. The entities do appear to be learning from each encounter. That doesn't explain why she's broadcasting military intelligence to the entire galaxy, Zarthek snapped. Maya continued, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was revealing. I have spent months analyzing every recorded encounter with these entities. The pattern is clear. They are preparing for a final assault on the core worlds, armed with countermeasures for every weapon system, every defensive strategy, every tactical doctrine we possess. In the depths of a Draknari bunker, War Master Groktar slammed his massive fist against a metal table, denting it significantly. This human speaks of defeat as if it is inevitable. We are warriors. We do not surrender. But even as he spoke, his own advisors were nodding grimly. The reports from the front lines painted an increasingly desperate picture. Each engagement became more one-sided as the entities adapted to Draknari fighting styles. However, Maya said, and something in her tone made millions of beings across the galaxy lean forward. There is one thing the entities haven't learned to counter yet. One approach they have never encountered in all their systematic data collection. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle across the countless worlds listening to her broadcast. They have never fought humans in actual combat. The statement hung in space like a challenge to physics itself. Murmurs rippled through command centers and civilian shelters alike. Humans were the newest members of the galactic community, barely 50 years since first contact. Their military was small, their technology primitive by galactic standards, their tactics largely theoretical, since they had never faced a true interstellar threat. Every other species in the galaxy developed their military doctrine based on their natural advantages, Maya continued. Draknari use overwhelming force because they are naturally strong. Altarians rely on energy manipulation because of their crystalline biology. The ethereals employ dimensional phasing because it comes naturally to them. Behind her, the last defense ship finally succumbed to converted weapon fire, its death adding another data point to the entity's ever-growing tactical database. But humans have no natural advantages. We're not stronger, faster, or more technologically advanced than our enemies. We're actually quite fragile by galactic standards, so we learn to fight differently. We learn to use our weaknesses as strengths, to turn our limitations into advantages, and most importantly, to be completely unpredictable. In the psionic collective's shared consciousness, millions of minds considered her words simultaneously. The concept of using weakness as strength was alien to their orderly way of thinking. But the mathematical logic was undeniable. I'm going to show you what human warfare really looks like, Maya said, her fingers moving to activate additional systems throughout Kepler Station. It will be brutal, desperate, and completely insane by civilized standards, but it will also be something the entities have never seen before. Warning lights began flashing throughout the station as Maya activated emergency protocols never meant to be used by a single individual. Blast doors sealed, atmospheric systems rerouted, and the station's massive fusion reactors began operating outside their normal parameters. She's turning the entire station into a weapon, Varric whispered, his crystalline skin now pulsing with patterns of awe and terror. Not a weapon, Maya corrected, her attention focused on the cascading system readouts. A trap. The entities had finished with the fleet and were now approaching the station, their massive forms moving with the confidence of predators that had never encountered effective resistance. Their sensors would be analyzing the station's structure, identifying power sources, defensive systems, and potential threats. What they wouldn't be looking for was a trap that violated every principle of rational warfare. In human history, we call this a Trojan horse, Maya explained to her galactic audience. The idea is simple. You give your enemy exactly what they want, and then you destroy them from the inside. Across the galaxy, military strategists struggled to understand the concept. Why would you deliberately allow an enemy to achieve their objectives? How could surrender lead to victory? Maya began typing rapidly, her fingers dancing across multiple interfaces simultaneously. Deep within the station's core, systems that had never been designed to work together began forming new connections. Life support networks merged with weapons arrays. Navigation computers interfaced with waste disposal systems, and the fusion reactors that powered everything started operating in patterns that would have terrified their designers. The entities want to study our technology, to learn from our defensive systems, Maya said, sweat beading on her forehead as she orchestrated the most complex system integration in the station's history. So I'm going to give them a very thorough education. The first entity made contact with the station's outer hull, its form flowing over the metal surface like liquid seeking every crack and crevice. Throughout the facility, sensors registered massive drops in power as the creature began draining energy from every available source. But instead of fighting the intrusion, Maya's modifications welcomed it. Every system the entity accessed fed it false information. Every power grid it tapped into was actually a carefully disguised weapon system, and every defensive measure it neutralized was really a trigger for something far more dangerous. Attention, Galactic military commands, Maya said, her voice now broadcasting on priority channels reserved for the highest levels of government. In 30 seconds, you're going to see something that has never been attempted in recorded history. A single human is going to destroy multiple void entities using nothing but improvisation, desperation, and a complete disregard for her own survival. She paused, looking directly into the camera with eyes that had seen too much in too short a time. This is what it means to be human. We don't just adapt to survive. We adapt to win no matter the cost. The countdown began, and across the galaxy, billions of beings watched a small human prepare to do the impossible. The first entity penetrated Kepler Station's hull like a living darkness, its impossible geometry flowing through corridors that seemed to reshape themselves to accommodate its passage. Throughout the facility, emergency systems screamed warnings, as power levels fluctuated wildly. But Maya had disabled most of the automated safety protocols hours ago. Energy absorption detected on Deck 7 through 12, the station's computer announced in its maddeningly calm voice. Initiating emergency containment procedures. Containment procedures overridden, Maya replied, her fingers flying across the command interface. Authorization Chen 7 Alpha. Execute Protocol Pandora. Professor Varek, still standing behind her in the communication center, watched in fascination and growing horror as his student orchestrated what could only be described as controlled chaos. Maya, what is Protocol Pandora? Something I've been working on for weeks, she replied without looking away from her screens. The beautiful thing about void entities is that they're incredibly efficient at absorbing and analyzing any energy pattern they encounter. They can't help themselves. It's like an instinct. On the holographic display, the entity continued its methodical progress through the station, sampling everything from fusion plasma to the basic electrical current that powered the lighting systems. Its form pulsed and shifted as it processed each new energy signature, building an ever more sophisticated understanding of galactic technology. So you're feeding it information, Varek said, understanding beginning to dawn in his crystalline features. Not just information, Maya smiled grimly. I'm feeding it a virus. The concept was uniquely human. Every other species in the galaxy had developed cybersecurity based on the assumption that their technology would be operated by rational beings following logical protocols. The idea of deliberately creating corrupted data designed to damage the system processing it was almost incomprehensibly alien to civilized minds. But humans had been dealing with computer viruses, malware, and deliberately destructive code for centuries before they ever reached the stars. Maya had simply taken those concepts and adapted them for an enemy that absorbed technology biologically rather than digitally. Energy pattern analysis complete, Maya announced to her galactic audience, now watching from millions of screens across known space. The entity has successfully integrated power signatures from fusion reactors, antimatter containment systems, quantum field generators, and approximately 47 other major technological systems. In fleet command centers throughout the galaxy, admirals and generals watched with professional interest as tactical displays showed the entity's expanding knowledge base. Some began taking notes, hoping to learn something useful about their enemy's capabilities. They had no idea they were about to witness the birth of an entirely new form of warfare. Initiating Phase 2, Maya said, her voice carrying across the cosmos with unnatural calm. Now that our friend has learned everything it wants to know about our technology, I'm going to teach it something about human creativity. Her fingers moved to a new set of controls, and deep within the station's core, systems that had been quietly preparing for this moment suddenly activated. The fusion reactors that the entity had so carefully analyzed weren't actually fusion reactors anymore. Maya had spent 3 sleepless nights reprogramming them to output energy in patterns that looked like fusion plasma, but were actually something far more dangerous. The quantum field generators had been modified to create spatial distortions that appeared stable, but contained hidden instabilities. Even the simple electrical systems now carried frequencies that would interact catastrophically with the entity's biological technology. The entity is attempting to replicate station power systems, Maya narrated for her audience, watching as the creature's form began to glow with absorbed energy. Standard operating procedure for void entities. Learn, adapt, overcome. It's worked perfectly for them in every previous encounter. But this wasn't a previous encounter. This was a human showing the galaxy what happened when someone refused to play by the established rules. The entity's form suddenly convulsed, its impossible geometry flickering as conflicting energy patterns began to interact within its structure. The creature had absorbed what it thought was standard fusion plasma, but Maya's modifications had created something that looked identical, while being fundamentally unstable. Problem is, Maya continued, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what was happening. When you're dealing with humans, nothing is ever what it appears to be. We've been practicing deception as an art form since before we discovered fire. The entity writhed as the corrupted energy patterns spread through its system like a cancer. Its adaptive capabilities, so perfectly suited for conventional warfare, became a liability as it tried to process information that had been deliberately designed to damage anything that analyzed it too closely. Energy cascade failure detected in entity primary, Maya announced. Beginning Phase 3. Throughout the station, every system the entity had sampled began activating simultaneously, but not in any way their designers had ever intended. Life, support systems started producing atmospheric mixtures that were perfectly breathable, but would explode if exposed to the specific energy frequencies the entity was now radiating. Waste processing systems began creating compounds that looked like industrial byproducts but were actually components of the most destructive explosive humans had ever developed. "This is impossible," Admiral Zarthek whispered from his command ship, watching the tactical display with growing amazement. "She's turned the entire station into a molecular-level weapon system." His aide's crystalline structure was flickering rapidly with excitement. "Sir, the energy readings are off the charts. Whatever she's doing, it's working." On worlds throughout the galaxy, beings who had dismissed humans as primitive newcomers watched in stunned silence as Maya orchestrated something that violated every principle of civilized warfare, while being absolutely brilliant in its execution. The first entity's death was spectacular even by cosmic standards. The creature simply came apart at a fundamental level, its biological technology unable to process the contradictory information it had absorbed. Energy patterns that had seemed perfectly compatible suddenly revealed themselves to be mutually exclusive, creating a cascade failure that propagated through the entity's entire structure in microseconds. But Maya wasn't finished. Entity Secondary through Entity 12 are maintaining safe distance, she reported, watching as the remaining creatures hung back from the station, clearly confused by their companion's destruction. They're analyzing the failure pattern, trying to understand what happened. She smiled, and it was the smile of a predator who had been underestimated for far too long. Time to teach them that humans don't just prepare one trap. The station's external sensors suddenly activated, broadcasting energy signatures that appeared to be distress calls, emergency beacons, and automated defense responses. To the entities, it would look like the station was damaged and vulnerable, its defenses compromised by the first entity's death. It was exactly the kind of opportunity that had allowed the entities to destroy dozens of previous targets. They're approaching, Maya narrated as the remaining 11 creatures began moving toward the station. Predictable behavior pattern: investigate weakness, exploit advantage, absorb useful technology. But Maya had spent months studying their behavior patterns, and she had prepared for this exact scenario. The energy signatures the station was broadcasting weren't random distress calls. They were bait, carefully crafted to appeal to the entity's need to understand and catalog new technology. Each signal contained the same type of viral information that had destroyed the first entity, but disguised as something completely different. Emergency protocols that were actually self-destructing algorithms. Defensive measures that would turn the entity's own adaptive abilities against them. Backup systems that would flood their biological technology with information designed to cause maximum damage. "Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted sentient beings," Maya said, addressing the galaxy with the casual tone of someone discussing the weather. "You are about to witness something that has never been seen in recorded history. 11 void entities are going to destroy themselves simultaneously, and they're going to do it because a human convinced them it was a good idea." The entities reached the station's hull and began their familiar pattern of energy absorption and analysis. But this time, every system they accessed had been weaponized. Every piece of information they processed had been corrupted, and every adaptive response they attempted only made their situation worse. Within minutes, all 11 remaining entities were experiencing cascade failures as their biological technology tried and failed to process information that had been designed by a species that viewed deception as a survival skill. "Mission accomplished," Maya said quietly, watching as the last entity came apart in a brilliant flash of dissipating energy. "Kepler Station is secure, threat eliminated." Across the galaxy, stunned silence gave way to a growing roar of celebration. The impossible had happened. The void entities had been defeated, not by superior firepower or advanced technology, but by the application of purely human cunning. The aftermath of the Kepler Station incident rippled across the galaxy faster than light itself. Within hours, Maya's broadcast had been viewed by billions of beings, analyzed by every major government, and debated in emergency sessions of the Galactic Council. The quiet human student who barely spoke in class had become the most talked-about person in known space. Maya herself was exhausted, slumped in the communications center chair while medical teams checked her for radiation exposure and stress-related injuries. The improvised weapons systems she had created were being carefully dismantled by teams of engineers who weren't entirely sure how they worked or why they hadn't destroyed the station along with the entities. "Remarkable," Professor Varick said for the dozenth time, his crystalline skin now pulsing with patterns that indicated deep contemplation. "In all my years studying warfare, I have never seen anything like this. You turned the station into a weapon that existed purely in the realm of information." Maya managed a tired smile. "Humans have always been good at making weapons out of things that weren't supposed to be weapons. Rocks, sticks, kitchen utensils, bad software code. The principle is the same regardless of the technology level." The communication array chimed with an incoming priority transmission. Maya straightened wearily as the holographic display activated, revealing the stern face of Admiral Zarthek of the Altarian Defense Force. "Student Chen," the Admiral began, his voice carrying the weight of official authority, "by order of the Galactic Defense Council, you are hereby requested to report to Fleet Command Headquarters immediately. Transport has been arranged. Am I under arrest?" Maya asked calmly. Zarthek's crystalline features flickered with what might have been amusement. "Under arrest?" "Student Chen, You just eliminated the greatest threat the galaxy has faced in recorded history using techniques that no military academy has ever taught. The Council wants to understand how you did it and whether it can be replicated. Maya stood slowly, her legs unsteady after hours of intense concentration. With respect, Admiral, what I did can't be taught in a military academy. You can't train people to think like humans without actually being human. The Admiral's image leaned forward slightly. Are you saying that this type of warfare is uniquely human? I'm saying that every species in the galaxy approaches problems from the perspective of their natural strengths, Maya replied. Altarians think in terms of energy manipulation. Draknari think in terms of overwhelming force. Psionics think in terms of mental coordination. But humans don't have any natural strengths, so we learn to think in terms of exploiting weaknesses instead. Before the Admiral could respond, another transmission interrupted, this one carrying the seal of the Draknari War Council. The image of War Master Groktar appeared alongside Zarthek, his massive frame barely fitting in the display. Human warrior, Groktar's voice boomed through the communication center. The Draknari wish to offer you command of our finest battle fleet. Your tactics bring honor to the concept of warfare. I appreciate the offer, Maya said diplomatically, but I'm not a warrior. I'm just someone who thinks differently about problems. A third transmission joined the conference, this one from the ethereal chambers of the Psionic Collective. Whisper Song's familiar mental voice touched Maya's consciousness directly. The collective has deliberated on your actions. Human Maya, we wish to invite you to share your knowledge with our strategic minds. Your approach to conflict resolution could revolutionize our understanding of adaptive warfare. More transmissions were coming in now, creating a cascade of holographic images around Maya. Representatives from dozens of species, all wanting to understand how a single human had accomplished what their combined fleets could not. This is exactly what I was afraid of, Maya muttered under her breath. Professor Varric caught her words and raised an eyebrow. Afraid of success? Afraid of being turned into a symbol, Maya replied. Everyone wants to learn human tactics, but they're missing the point. The reason what I did worked is because it was completely unexpected. The moment you systematize it, teach it in academies and turn it into standard doctrine, it stops being effective. She gestured to the growing crowd of holographic officials. Look at them. They want to take human unpredictability and turn it into predictable military strategy. It's like trying to capture lightning in a bottle. Admiral Zarthek's voice cut through the chatter. Are you saying that this victory was a one-time event? That these tactics cannot be used again? Maya considered the question carefully. Around her, the communication center had become a babel of different languages and transmission frequencies, as more officials demanded her attention. The specific tactics I used against the void entities won't work again, she said finally. Any future enemies will know to watch for viral information patterns and corrupted energy signatures. But the principle behind what I did, using deception, misdirection, and psychological warfare, that's as old as humanity itself. She paused, looking at each of the assembled officials in turn. The question is whether the galaxy is ready to abandon the concept of honorable warfare in favor of tactics that actually work. War Master Groktar snorted dismissively. Honor is meaningless if your enemies are all dead, human. The Draknari understand this, do you? Maya challenged. Because everything I've read about Draknari military doctrine emphasizes direct confrontation, individual combat prowess, and victory through superior strength. What I did involved lying, cheating, and sacrificing myself to set a trap. By Draknari standards, it was completely dishonorable. The War Master's expression grew thoughtful. Perhaps honor is a luxury we can no longer afford. That's exactly the kind of thinking that will get you all killed, Maya said bluntly. You're still trying to systematize this to turn it into doctrine. But the moment human tactics become predictable, they stop being human tactics. Whisper Song's mental voice carried puzzlement. Then how do you propose we integrate these concepts into galactic defense strategies? Maya was quiet for a long moment, considering a truth that she had hoped not to voice. The assembled officials waited, their alien faces reflecting varying degrees of impatience and curiosity. You don't integrate them, she said finally. You leave them with humans. You let us handle the problems that can't be solved through conventional means, and you stay out of our way when we do. The suggestion sent a ripple of shock through the assembled officials. The idea of giving one species exclusive responsibility for unconventional warfare went against every principle of galactic cooperation. You proposed the creation of a human military unit operating outside normal command structures? Admiral Zarthek asked carefully. I propose the recognition that some problems require uniquely human solutions, Maya replied, and that the attempt to make those solutions palatable to galactic sensibilities will render them useless. She stood up straighter, fatigue falling away as she found her conviction. The void entities weren't defeated by superior technology or overwhelming force. They were defeated by one human who was willing to do whatever it took to win, regardless of how insane it looked to everyone else. The communications center fell silent as the implications sank in. Maya was suggesting something unprecedented. In galactic history, the acknowledgement that one species might possess capabilities that others simply could not replicate or understand. I need to think about this, Admiral Zarthek said finally. We all do. Student Chen, your transport to fleet headquarters remains available, but I suspect this conversation is far from over. As the various transmissions ended, leaving Maya alone with Professor Varek in the suddenly quiet communication center, she reflected on how much her life had changed in the space of a few hours. You realize what you've just done? Varek said quietly. You've essentially declared humans to be the galaxy's specialists in impossible warfare. Maya nodded, looking out through the viewport at the debris field that had once been 12 unstoppable entities. Someone has to be, and apparently we're very good at it. But even as she said the words, Maya knew that this was only the beginning. The galaxy was vast, full of threats both known and unknown, and somewhere out there, other impossible problems were waiting for uniquely human solutions. 6 months after the Kepler station incident, Maya Chen found herself in the most unlikely position imaginable for someone who had barely spoken in class. She stood in the center of the Galactic Council's main assembly hall, addressing representatives from 47 different species about the formation of what would become known as the Terran Irregulars. The debate had raged for weeks. Traditional military leaders argued that unorthodox tactics should be integrated into existing command structures. Diplomatic Corps insisted that any human military unit should operate under galactic oversight. Scientists wanted to study human psychological warfare capabilities in controlled laboratory conditions. Maya had listened to all of them with the same quiet patience she had once shown in Professor Varek's xenobiology class. Then she had calmly explained why every single approach they suggested would fail. Honorable representatives, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber, you are trying to solve a human problem with non-human solutions. The effectiveness of unconventional warfare depends entirely on its unpredictability. The moment you make it conventional, it stops working. In the Altarian section, Admiral Zarthek raised a crystalline hand. Agent Chen, surely there must be some way to coordinate human tactical capabilities with existing defense protocols. Maya's title had changed several times during the political negotiations. She had gone from Student Chen to Agent Chen to her current designation as Director Chen of the newly formed Terran Tactical Division. The promotion still felt surreal. Admiral, with respect, coordination requires communication. Communication requires planning. Planning requires predictability. And predictability is exactly what unconventional warfare is designed to eliminate. She activated a holographic display showing tactical analyses from recent human military exercises. 3 months ago, the Draknari War Council asked us to demonstrate human tactics in a controlled environment. We obliged them by conducting training scenarios against their best units. The hologram showed human forces that appeared completely disorganized, using equipment that seemed random, following no apparent strategy. Against them, disciplined Draknari formations advanced with textbook precision, overwhelming force and superior firepower. The humans lost every single engagement. As you can see, when human tactics are constrained by rules, schedules, and oversight, they become completely ineffective, Maya continued. The Draknari forces knew they were in an exercise, knew there would be no real casualties, and knew that certain weapons and strategies were off limits. Under those conditions, conventional military doctrine performed exactly as expected. War Master Groktar's voice rumbled through the assembly hall. Your forces showed no honor, human. They retreated constantly, avoided direct confrontation, and employed deception even against allies. Exactly. Maya replied without a hint of defensiveness. Human military doctrine assumes that honor is a luxury you can afford only when you're winning. When you're losing, survival takes precedence over everything else. She activated a second holographic display, this one showing a very different scenario. 2 weeks later, we conducted an unscheduled exercise. Human operatives were told only that hostile forces were approaching a civilian installation, and that all conventional defenses had failed. They were given no rules of engagement, no list of prohibited weapons, and no guarantee that it was just an exercise. The new hologram showed the same Draknari forces, using identical tactics and equipment, but this time, they never made it within 10 kilometers of their target. Human forces had turned the entire battlefield into a death trap, using improvised weapons, psychological warfare, and tactics that violated every accepted principle of military engagement. The difference, Maya explained, was that in the second scenario the humans believed they were fighting for their lives. Under those conditions, human tactics become genuinely unpredictable because we are literally making them up as we go along. A representative from the ethereal collective rose gracefully to speak. Director Chen, are you suggesting that human military effectiveness requires the belief that death is imminent? I'm suggesting that human military effectiveness requires the freedom to use any means necessary to achieve objectives, Maya replied. When you place restrictions on human forces, you force them to think like every other species in the galaxy. And thinking like everyone else is exactly how you get defeated by enemies who have studied everyone else. The assembly hall buzzed with discussion as representatives conferred among themselves. The concept Maya was proposing challenged fundamental assumptions about military cooperation and galactic unity. Chancellor Tormek of the United Systems Alliance finally spoke, his mechanical voice carrying the weight of official skepticism. Director Chen, what you are describing sounds dangerously close to giving humans carte blanche to operate outside all established protocols. How can the galaxy trust such an arrangement? Maya had been expecting this question. It was the heart of every concern, every fear, every doubt that had been raised during months of negotiations. Chancellor, let me ask you a different question, she said. 6 months ago, how much did you trust the void entities? The question caught him off guard. We didn't trust them at all. They were a threat to all sentient life. And yet every species in the galaxy was willing to coordinate with them, Maya continued. You learned their patterns, adapted to their tactics, even modified your own strategies to counter their capabilities. You treated them as a known quantity and responded accordingly. She paused, letting the implication sink in. The reason they were so effective was because they appeared to be following logical, predictable patterns. Every species could understand their behavior and develop countermeasures. But those countermeasures were exactly what the entities wanted you to develop, because they were learning from every response. The assembly hall had grown very quiet. Now you're asking me to make human tactics logical and predictable so that you can understand and coordinate with them. But the moment you understand human tactics well enough to coordinate with them, your enemies will understand them well enough to counter them. Maya activated a final holographic display, this one showing current threat assessments from across the galaxy, pirates using void entity technology, rogue AI systems that had learned from the entity's adaptive capabilities, and 3 separate species that had gone dark after being contacted by unknown forces. The void entities weren't unique, she said quietly. They were just the first wave. Our analysis suggests that something out there has been systematically testing galactic defensive capabilities for centuries, using different approaches to gather intelligence. Gasps echoed through the assembly hall as the implications became clear. The entities were a field test, Maya continued. Someone wanted to know how the galaxy would respond to an adaptive threat. Now they know exactly how effective our conventional military doctrine is against unconventional enemies. She looked around the vast chamber, meeting the eyes of representatives who were beginning to understand the scope of the challenge they faced. Which means that the next threat we face will be prepared for everything except human tactics. But only if human tactics remain genuinely human, unpredictable, improvisational, and completely unacceptable by civilized standards. The vote that followed was closer than anyone had expected. In the end, the Terran Tactical Division was authorized with unprecedented autonomy, answering directly to the Galactic Council but operating outside all conventional military command structures. Maya found herself with a budget, a mandate, and the freedom to recruit humans who thought like her, people who saw impossible problems as interesting challenges rather than insurmountable obstacles. As she left the assembly hall, surrounded by aides and advisors discussing operational details, Maya reflected on how far she had come from the quiet student who barely spoke in class. But in many ways, nothing had really changed. She was still the human who saw patterns others missed, still the person willing to do whatever it took to solve problems that everyone else considered impossible. The only difference was that now the galaxy was counting on her to keep being exactly that strange, unpredictable and thoroughly human. Behind her, in the great assembly hall, representatives from 47 species continued debating the wisdom of trusting humanity's most dangerous capabilities to humanity itself. They would have their answer soon enough. In the depths of space, other threats were already beginning to move, confident in their understanding of galactic military doctrine and certain that they had learned everything they needed to know about their enemies. They had no idea what humans were capable of when they stopped trying to be civilized, and Maya Chen intended to keep it that way.